Yeah, that's right, my friends. That was Ariel Pink and Only You're Dead, Lester Bangs from an album, a couple albums ago, I do believe, and a great collection by Ariel. And we are lucky enough. Well, there's a movie that came out just at the end of last year called Box Full of Rocks: The El Cajon Years of Lester Bangs. And those of you who have been listening to this show for a long time know that I'm often referencing Lester Bangs, and we discuss a lot of his work with Cream and Rolling Stone and this and that and the other thing, and a lot of bands he loved at the time. And what a lot of us don't know, including myself, and that I learned a lot from this great film, is about his early formative years, and we are extremely lucky to have RAUL SANDELIN on the line right now, who will be discussing the film, his film, he's the director, with us. RAUL, welcome to Finn's Revolution on WUSB Stony Brook.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Finn. Great to be on the air.
Yeah, and it's very exciting to have you on. And I have checked out the film, and it is absolutely really cool and really amazing and extremely informative. A lot of stuff I'm a Lester Bangs fan from way back, did not know a lot about. And first of all, the film is called what?
A Box Full of Rocks, The El Cajon Years of Lester Bangs. And it should be noted here that El Cajon is Spanish for the box.
Right.
That's because of the geography of the place. It's kind of a valley surrounded by tall mountains, so it really is like a box, both physically and metaphorically. So, that has a lot to do in Lester's formation as well.
Which is what makes it a great title as well, because a lot of things I didn't know about Lester's upbringing and all that. Why don't you tell us a little about the world Lester grew up in California, and what kind of life he led? Because a lot of people are not familiar with that.
Yeah, well, he was born in San Diego County, actually in a neighboring little town called Escondido, and they traveled around the Southwest, mostly between San Diego and Arizona, through family connections and also through connections with the Jehovah's Witnesses, which his mom was a devout Jehovah's Witness. So they traveled around the Southwest the first 10 or so years of his life. And also at that time, his father burned to death in a house fire. Despite the fact that his mom was a devout Jehovah's Witness, his dad, who was an ex-con, was a drinker and a smoker and vehemently against organized religion. So Conway Bangs went to sleep one night with a drink in his hand and a cigarette in his mouth and never woke up. And I emphasize this because I think that had a lot to do in the formation of Lester's psyche later on. But then when he was 11 years old, his mom and Lester, alone at this point, settled in El Cajon, which is still in San Diego County, about 20 miles from Escondido, where he was originally born. And he lived in El Cajon from 1960 to 1971. So when he was about 12 years old to when he was about 23. And then, of course, in 1971, he was hired to write for Cream, and he moved back to Detroit to live in the Cream house.
Right. But, yeah, so those early years, he had a real push and pull in his life between his Jehovah's Witness mom, which is something I did not know till I saw the film, and his kind of wild dad, to a certain degree, who actually, Lester probably rebelled a little bit against mom and leaned towards dad's wild side, huh?
Yeah, and I think Conway Bangs, that was Lester's dad, probably fit into the mold of the post-war beat / up-and-coming countercultural hippies. I mean, I'm not saying Conway Bangs was a hippie, but he was, like I said, a drinker and a smoker and a carouser. He had been arrested several times. So he was a rebel. He was an outlaw. And, yeah, Lester definitely identified with that and with the dawning of the 60s, that kind of role model made a lot more sense than a much more traditional, highly religious mother. The thing is, Conway Bangs died when Lester was 7 or 8, and his mom lived on. So that was a real dichotomy. You had Lester, who identified with his father, living with his mom, who was a complete diametrical opposite of him.
Right, and Lester's extended family as well. A lot of musical interests there. Even though that, of course, is the other great thing, which not everyone knows, but most people know, that Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, do not utilize music in their lives in general, and they certainly don't utilize it in their religious ceremonies. And yet Lester, was this rebel attracted to music, and some of that came through some of his other family members, right?
Yeah. All of Norma's family basically were Jehovah's Witnesses, so that whole side of her family. And also she had 3 adult children by that time. Lester was kind of an afterthought. He was born when Norma was about 40 years old, actually a little older, about 42. So he had older siblings that had already grown up. But yeah, they were all Jehovah's Witnesses, the whole family. And of course, he didn't have much contact with Conway's family, especially after Conway burned to death. So yeah, he was surrounded by Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right, but he also had a nephew, right, that was older than he was due to the fact that his half-siblings were much older.
Yeah, exactly. So Ben Ketching, who is technically Lester's nephew, is actually a few years older. Kind of a funny little play on genealogy there. But yeah, and then it was Ben who introduced Lester to bebop records. They would go to the thrift store or the thrifty drugstore here in El Cajon and buy bargain bin jazz records, Coltrane, Miles, Mingus, things like that. And yeah, it was really Ben, the older nephew, who kind of introduced Lester to music. And also the beat writers, Kerouac, Burroughs, things like that. So Lester was getting this education through his nephew, Ben, and then, as stated in the film, he took it all and ran. I mean, Ben sort of stopped short, as many teenagers do, and Lester just kept on going.
Right.
And it soon evolved into a love for rock and roll and, a love for writing. And, nobody could stop him at a certain point, literally. I mean, Lester would write all night and just keep going and going and going.
Yeah, and through his high school years, actually, he kind of blossomed, right? And he was, but the impression I get from the film is that when he was very young, he was a bit more maybe introverted or on his own, whereas when he became more in high school, he actually found things he latched onto, like theater and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, very much so. And it should be said, despite some of the, popular mythology, El Cajon, although it is a box, and although many people find it very confining, and we use language like escaping the box or climbing out of the box, El Cajon had a lot of culture at that time. It was, like all of America in the post-war boom, it was interconnected with the greater world. And the high school that they went to, El Cajon Valley High School, had a complete theater, drama department, music department. So they were able to, act out their artistic fantasies. And Lester, was in drama, did theater, definitely did writing, wrote for Thought magazine, which was the literary journal, El Cajon High. And he discovered these two art forms, writing and music. And he always wanted to be a musician. And I guess this is a stereotype that rock writers are just frustrated musicians. But with Lester, it really holds true. He wanted to be a musician, but his real forte and what people recognized him for was his ability to write. And it took him a few years, really till 1969 or so, But he finally put those two things together and came up, didn't come up, but really mastered this new art form, which was rock and roll criticism and journalism. And as we know, he became the iconic figure of that genre.
Oh yeah, and of course went on to Rolling Stone and Cream and all those magazines and did some brilliant work. But it's just fascinating to me, as the film points out, that great dichotomy in his growing up and this push and pull. It seems like he'd be the kind of character that would just be rebellious against whatever, but yet he emulated and idolized his dad very much. And, it's just absolutely beautiful. And the way he, follows, is pushed and pulled. And which is certainly not an uncommon experience for anybody in their youth. But, with him, because he's such an icon, it's such a interesting thing to see and watch. And of course, he had lots of friends, and he also did play music, right, in high school.
Yeah. El Cajon was booming musically in the early mid-'60s. Before, Lester, Iron Butterfly came from El Cajon.
That's right.
Frank Zappa bought his first record player in El Cajon and went to high school in El Cajon. And there was a huge club here, the Hi-Ho Club, that was an underage teenage nightclub, and it was really the biggest thing in Southern California. People would drive down from Orange County, L.A., Yuma, Arizona, just to go to the Hi-Ho Club. And that's where Lester's friends, Jerry Rainey and Jack Butler, formed the Dark Ages, which was a rock and roll band that held court at the Hi-Ho Club. And then Lester would get up on stage and play harmonica on some of the bluesier songs, like I'm a Man. They would do a Yardbirds rave up, and Lester would get up on stage and jam with them.
I thought one of the great quotes from the film was where one of the guys in the band there remembers Lester's solo being the same in every song, but absolutely great and fit in.
Yeah, Lester was about energy, and even though he was a great writer, one of the things that he has that not every great writer has is just that unbounding, limitless energy. And musically, as has been noted, Lester's musical abilities were lacking. I mean, he was a great writer, but a mediocre musician, to be flat out. When he would go up and blow harp with the Dark Ages, it was pretty much the same solo, different song. So, he had one solo that he used throughout the night. But as noted in the film, it worked, because of that energy. The energy came through, even though the musical ability might have been a little challenged or lacking.
Right. In fact, that's somewhat, although the writing is much more sophisticated and has more depth than, let's say, the harmonica solo might have. But that's somewhat of his writing career too, right? He kind of latched on to something stylistically and kept at it, and that was his style,
Yeah, and his writing style matured and expanded as he just got more and more knowledge under his belt. But it was that energy that really, separated Lester from everybody else, and also separated the things Lester liked from things he didn't. For instance, Lester was a big proponent of punk rock, and in fact, many sources list Lester as being the one to coin the term punk rock. That's a little bit debatable, and I don't want to quite get into that controversy, but he was definitely one of the first journalists to use the term punk rock. But what he liked about it was the energy. Give him 3 chords and energy, and Lester was happy. He wasn't, into musical finesse. He, as noted in the film, he didn't like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. He didn't like the prog rock direction that a lot of 70s bands were taking. What he liked was the energy, and you could be the Sex Pistols or the Ramones, but if you had those 3 chords and that boundless energy, to match Lester's, then he liked you.
And that was what it was all about. Certainly a certain energy, and certainly a certain aggression too. Like I'm not going to stand for anything less than something I love, right? And if it's not something I love, I dismiss it. And that was a great thing. I remember reading, and this is of course a little bit later on, but I remember reading a lot of Lester's reviews, and I think some of his best stuff was when he wrote the scathing review, as opposed to what he loved. And that was just as much energy,
Oh, yeah. And this didn't come across as much in the film, but I'm going to be writing an article for Ugly Things magazine due out in the spring, in which I'm going to kind of summarize some of the things that didn't quite make it into the film. And one of the things I do want to emphasize, is that, it was that energy that drew him in. And if you gave him that energy, he would match it with his own. Now he certainly used chemicals to help him do that more and more, unfortunately. But still, that's the lifestyle that he lived.
Yeah, and that's exactly the case. Lester grabbed life by the Cajons, as they say.
By something, yeah. He grabbed something of life, yeah, and rode it as fast and furious as he could.
And he did, and he was not one of those guys that was interested in everything. He had his interests that he absolutely loved and focused on those things. And that's another thing. You talk about his high school years. He wasn't a guy who was into sports or things along those lines, because that's not the things he loved. But, he when he latched onto music, that was it for him.
Yeah, and at a furious pace. I mean, I've never seen anybody like that, who he clung on to music and literature kind of as these dual art forms when he was about 14 years old, and never let go.
Right, and we were talking about how he got turned on to the books and the music by his cousin initially. But yeah, Burroughs, Kerouac, all those guys, Hunter Thompson a little later, certainly, and all of that just got synthesized into him, and the rock and roll. And that's where like a love of a band like the Stooges comes out. That's it. It's the adventure, it's the energy, it's all those things that the Stooges are, for example.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the Stooges, then, of course, MC5, right. And then as, 60s garage rock, eventually evolved into this thing that they would call punk rock, all of those bands, which, of course, then he later met at CBGB's when he moved to New York, and really was a regular at CBGB's. So he was there at, ground zero of the punk explosion when it happened.
Right. Oh, yeah. But exactly. And of course took it from there, and between Detroit and New York and all that, and all the energy from all those places and all those rock scenes, punk scenes. How did you get involved in becoming interested in Lester, and how did this get in your blood?
Yeah, well, I grew up in El Cajon. I'm an El Cajon kid, one of these, and there actually is a term for it. It's El Cajon rock and roll kid. So in many ways, I was like Lester. I'm about 15 years younger than Lester. Mm-hmm. But when I was in my teens in the later 70s, everybody was still talking about Lester Bangs. There was this local legend who had gone on to write for Cream magazine. So they were a lot of the older guys were saying, you got to read this. Here's this guy. Look, Cream magazine. Here, this guy is from El Cajon, just like us. So I heard about Lester and read a little bit of Lester in my teen years, and then I really got to give credit to all the people who helped with the Lester Bangs revival. Grail Marcus, who put together the first anthology, John Morthland, who put together the second anthology, Jim DeRogatis, who wrote Lester's biography, and then, of course, Cameron Crowe, who produced Almost Famous.
Right.
which contains an actual Lester Bangs character played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. And all of that came together about the year 2000. And I call it the Lester Bangs revival, because there was, all these different sources writing and creating based around Lester at that time. And that's when I really rediscovered Lester. Also locally, one of Lester's best friends from high school, Rob Houghton, who is in the film, and now who I call a good friend, he wrote an article for the local San Diego Reader, which is one of our music cultural newspapers, one of our weekly freebies. And he wrote a cover article about his high school days with Lester Bangs. And I read that. And again, all of this was happening right around the year 2000. And, it was just so much synergy, it couldn't be ignored. Now, with that said, I teach English and literature at Grossmont College in El Cajon, which is Lester's alma mater, by the way. Mm-hmm. So after this revival, a lot of us started getting interested in ways that we could honor Lester, since he really is the most famous and most profound writer or literary figure to come out of El Cajon. So since this was Lester's alma mater and we're all, El Cajon locals, we wanted to figure out what we could do to honor Lester. And we started first a Lester Bangs archive at Grossmont, and that's online, by the way. And then some of the other professors started a Lester Bangs reading, an annual reading of his work and student work that's related to Lester or inspired by Lester. And then ultimately, all this stuff was germinating, and about 3 years ago, I just thought, you know what? I want to make a movie about this guy. And that's where all of that started. And of course, I've had a lot of help along the way. I've had help from Grossmont College, as I've mentioned, had help from a great guy in Alabama, Ed Turner, who has a production company, Road Ahead Productions, who, finds and helps fund creative and artistic projects, and then all the individuals who pitched in, locally, friends of Lester, other associates, colleagues, instructors at Grossmont College. Everybody just kind of centered around the project and really helped me make it happen.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful film. One of the things you're emphasizing there is, we were talking just before about Lester as a guy who looked for excitement and latched onto things and all this, but one of the things you just emphasized in what you were just saying was Lester the writer. And that's a big, big, big thing, because the guy has energy on a page. We're not just talking about the personal energy we were talking about before, or his excitement about certain things, or turning the public on to certain kinds of music, or whatever the case is. But the way he wrote, it was as if he was speaking to you. You felt like he was in the room with you, speaking to you. And that's an amazing thing to truly pull off. And I have to tell you that when I was a kid, and I was getting, copies of Cream magazine at the local, Five and Dime or what have you, he was a guy that one of many, but he was a guy that excited me about reading. I was fully excited about reading. I couldn't believe what he did with the language. Do you guys have a specific take on the kind of excitement you get maybe from reading Lester? I mean, just the way he expresses himself?
Yeah, several things. He was a reader from an early age, as noted. He was reading the Beats when he was 13, 14 years old, and comic books before that. And he had a way of voraciously just, gobbling up any literature that was placed in front of him. So he was a reader before he was a writer. Also, I think it should be emphasized, like a lot of people in the 19th century, he became literate and literary through reading the Bible. He was exposed and forced to read the Bible from an early age, probably before a lot of kids were actually reading. And, agree with it or not, but the Bible is a pretty complex piece of work, and you have to be able to follow the train of thought and the logic. You have to do a lot of thinking. It's not something that a 7-year-old normally passively does. Lester was forced to read the Bible and discuss the Bible from an early age, and I think that had an influence on him. I think in many ways Lester was a biblical preacher, just swapped the Jehovah's Witnesses for rock and roll. But that energy, that fire and brimstone that other preachers and people of the cloth might be known for, Lester got that too. He just, when in his teens, he, formally rejected the witnesses and then ultimately joined the Church of Rock and Roll and never left.
What's interesting about what you just said is that very often, a lot of the great singers, R&B singers particularly, coming out of a church gospel tradition as singers and bringing the rock and roll forward. Whereas Lester came from the gospel on the page and brought the rock and roll forward.
Yeah, and as you say that's exactly what I think happened. And I'm sure others have made note of this also. I don't think it's a new discovery, but as we kind of dissect Lester Bangs, we have to acknowledge that early religious upbringing and the positive, things that it did, play in his life and his writing career. But yeah, when you mention a lot of gospel musicians, or musicians who come out of a gospel background, yeah, I mean, the Bible is right there. It's in the roots of rock and roll.
Yeah. So now, after Lester left, how old was he when he left? 23?
23, yeah. 1971, he was born in 48. So he would have been 22 going on 23, yeah.
And he left to go to, at the time, Detroit or New York?
To Detroit. His writing career began in 1968 when he started writing music reviews, record reviews for the local, the local weekly newspaper, which then was called The Door and later changed its name to The Reader. And I spoke about The Reader a little while ago. But then it was called The Door. And Lester started writing locally, and then nobody really knows why, but somewhere along the line, he got the bug to start sending out reviews to the national magazines. And pretty soon after that, Jan Wenner at Rolling Stone, discovered him and, started letting him freelance. Even flew him up to San Francisco to meet the staff at one point. So he, by 1969, he was freelancing for Rolling Stone, and that lasted for about 2 years. And then he had a semi-famous falling out with Jan Wenner.
Right.
When he blasted the MC5 right at the time when the MC5 promo people were placing ads for the MC5 in Rolling Stone magazine.
For Kick Out the Jams, actually, right?
Yeah, for the first album. So Lester blasted the album, and that, rubbed the MC5 and Jan Wenner the wrong way. Now later, Lester would meet the MC5 in Detroit and make up with them, and then announce that the MC5 was one of his favorite bands. But back in 1969, there was a little bit of a feud brewing. So Lester was basically dismissed, or, his freelance work with Rolling Stone, was terminated. But Cream was interested in him, and he had started doing some freelancing for Cream, which was based in Detroit. So by 1971, he had, written enough stuff as a freelancer for them that I believe it was Dave Marsh,
Sure.
called him and brought him back to Detroit and ultimately hired him. And then again, at about, age 22, almost 23, Lester decided to make the big move and left El Cajon, left the box, climbed out of the box, and moved to Detroit.
Yeah, wow. And the rest is history, as they say. But did he come back over the years to El Cajon?
Yeah, he came back, and I think this is significant for those who think, that he just absolutely hated El Cajon and hated his mother, and when he left for Detroit, never looked back. That's really not true. He always came back regularly on holidays, and always went straight to his mother's. Always stayed at his mother's house, or at least stopped there first. And he did that quite regularly, maybe not every year, but almost every year. So he made his way back to Detroit, a good 10 times between 1971 and 1982 when he ultimately passed away.
Okay. When did his mom pass, or what's the story with his mom?
His mom passed away about 2 months before he did.
Oh.
He died in spring of 1982. She died about 2 months before that. I'm thinking she died about in February, and then he died in, I guess, April.
Right, exactly.
He came back to El Cajon to, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they cremate the body, so there is no funeral. But he came back, and I believe it was Ben Ketching, his older nephew, they went out to the ocean. El Cajon is 15 miles from San Diego and 15 miles from the beach. So they took the ashes down to the ocean and spread them, threw them into the sea. And then Lester visited with friends, visited definitely with Gary Raychek, who is in the movie. And in fact, Gary says he was one of the last people to see Lester from El Cajon. So he visited with friends and then went back to New York. And then about 2 months later, Lester, unfortunately, died of an accidental overdose.
Very interesting right there, though, right? After his mom, who he always had a push and pull with, but clearly loved.
Yep.
After she goes, he goes. Very interesting. So you put together a great film. What's the future for the film as far as what are you looking at for distribution? How can people see it now? Actually, that's question one. How can people see it now?
It's online, and it's a freebie. We're not seeking any money out of this. It was started as a Grossmont College /student project officially. Some Grossmont students helped me as well as all the professors and other people I mentioned earlier. So we aren't seeking any money from it, and it's online right now. Again, people can Google A Box Full of Rocks, The El Cajon Years of Lester Bangs. They can also go to the Grossmont College archives. As I said, we've set up a Lester Bangs archive at Grossmont College, and that's online. And the film is linked to the archives, so they can, when they get to the archives, they can actually now click on an ashtray in the middle of the splash page
right.
and go to the film. So it's free for everybody. Everybody can go home right now and in 5 seconds be watching A Box Full of Rocks.
Right. So the best thing to do, I think the simplest thing for most people is to go Box Full of Rocks, Lester Bangs, and you shall find it. And when you Google it, and it's quite a beautiful, amazing film. Are there any plans in the future, Raul, to have a DVD release, a theatrical showing? Is there anything happening currently?
We've been talking about possibly showing the film locally. We have a few art houses here in San Diego, maybe renting an art house, specifically the Ken Cinema, and showing it there. We are, and this is a tangible, we are, as we speak, in the works of putting together a soundtrack CD with all the music from the film. And my friend who I mentioned earlier, Edward Turner of Road Ahead Productions, he's financing the soundtrack. So we will have a CD out in the next month or so with all the music from the film.
That is very exciting. And also, obviously, people can find out more about that when they do the Google and find the site, Box Full of Rocks, Lester Bangs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a great site. You guys actually put together a beautiful website there. It's packed with info just on its own besides the film. And it's really nicely done.
Should give Carl Sherlock, Professor Carl Sherlock at Grossmont, a shout out on that. He was the one who, designed the website and put lots and lots of work into it.
Yeah, it's a very nice job. So tonight, tonight's interview is going to be up online tomorrow on YouTube, and the link for anybody out there will be, you just hit Finn's Revolution or WUSB. Type in Lester Bangs with both of those, either Finn's Revolution, WUSB, Lester Bangs, and you will find it online. And on the playlist, which will also be up later tonight, you will find the direct link to check out the film at WUSB.FM. Raul Sandelin, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time and doing such a beautiful job on this wonderful film and enlightening us about stuff about Lester Bangs that certainly I didn't know about. And you've just done a great job, and I wish you the best of luck with the film, and hopefully it gets to show some theaters here in the New York City area in the future, because that's another great market for this movie.
Yeah, and if there are any film festivals out there that would like to show the film, we would certainly be happy to grant permission or whatever needs to be done so that any film festivals can do that. I also just wanted to mention that Ed Turner and I are now starting on a part two of sorts. We're doing a new film called The Rock Bards, which looks at the golden age of rock journalism, 1966 to 1980. And it'll look at Lester Bangs, but it'll also look at some of the other heavyweights, the Richard Meltzers, the Dave Marshes, the Janu Helskis, Susan Whitehalls. So there's a new film that's going to carry on the tradition, and hopefully we'll have that done about a year from now.
Raul, very exciting stuff, and we're looking forward to it. Once again, you want to just Google Box Full of Rocks, Lester Bangs, or go onto my Facebook page, Finn Miller or Finn's Revolution, and check it out, and you can find the link right there. But an absolutely amazing film. And Raul, thank you so much for joining us on WUSB Stony Brook, and we shall be in touch very shortly, my friend.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Finn.
Take care.
Okay, you too.